Do you know what this tool is? If not, you want to. This is your water main shutoff, so if you have a burst pipe during the middle of a frost storm, hello Bella, would you like to be in this video? My donkeys, who are also part-time plumbers, want you to know where your tool is, where your water shutoff is, and far more important to them, where their snacks are before the frost. I made this video because too many times I've gotten myself caught in the cold and ended up having to do tons of projects that I didn't have the time or the money to do, and they were emergencies, so we still had to do them. And I don't want that for you. And so here's my checklist that I've made after several years of screwing something up every winter storm because I forgot to do something important. Whether you're a farmer or a house owner, the single greatest gift I gave myself when it comes to winter prep a few years ago was swapping out all of my outdoor hose bibs to these frost-free automatic depressurizing hose bibs. It is a major pain to not have water because your pipes freeze, but it's an even bigger pain to have your pipes burst because you forgot to winterize your pipes. So this is well worth the time and financial investment on every single one of your outdoor hose bibs. There we are, we're back in water. And even though these do most of the work for us, there's still a few more components that I have to think about every time it freezes. First, I want to open every connection point. And a bonus tip is that if you can open all those connection points and then leave them on an incline, they'll usually drain most of the way out before the frost happens, and that will save you having to buy a whole bunch of stuff if you do in fact forget to do any of these steps. Beth, are you sucking your tongue? This is like the donkey version of sucking your thumb. Most donkeys stop doing it when they're older, but some do it for their whole lives. And sweet 9-year-old Bella here still sucking her thumb. Earlier I asked if you knew what that water main shutoff tool was and if you knew where the water main shutoff was. And that's because in the middle of a storm, I found out the answer to both of those things the hard and very expensive way. Prior to our first really cold snap that we had while living in this house, I didn't realize that the pipes behind this wall are actually exposed to a lot of open air. And when it gets really cold and you have pipes running through your crawl space, you might have your entire house's water system freeze like we did too. But now that we know that that is a likely recurring problem every time it gets really cold here, now we know to prep, and we'll put blankets or towels around the pipes, insulate them as best as we can, and then put an oil heater on an extension cord down in that crawl space before the frost, and that helps us to avoid those problems. If it's going to get really cold and you have plumbing running on your outside walls, a really easy thing to do, aside from turning on your faucets so that they're just dripping a little bit, which will keep water coming through the pipes, you can also just open your cabinet doors and let the heat from your house get to the pipes, which will also help offset that cold. A lot of times in winter storms, it's not actually the freeze that's the problem, it's the thaw. And thinking about where all of that accumulated water is actually going to go once it does thaw is very important. Case in point, think about this little gutter situation here and how I brilliantly thought to extend the spray zone of the water out that way. And that's simply because when I watched where the water was going in a rainstorm, it was going directly into Lucy's little pig house here. And that's why it was constantly wet and we were constantly having to change the bedding. That's one of those things that's like, well, duh, but also not really duh for someone who didn't grow up on a farm or grow up doing any of this stuff. It's just like you find it out over time. And well, yeah, this is a really easy fix to that. And now Lucy doesn't have to be wet. Although for whatever reason, she's no longer living in this house and she's moved into the tarps over there. Lucy! Last night I heard some rustling out in my tarps and realized that Lucy the pig has inexplicably moved out of her pig house and has made herself a little nest in these old tarps. Look at all this. She's like come in and picked herself some hay, bedding, but that's not going to work. So we got to pick that up and get it out of the way here. Most of us store things like chemicals and paints and batteries and hand tools and things in our garage that if we were to have our garage freeze would actually be a disaster. So if you have an unheated garage, definitely think about at least temporarily bringing that stuff inside so you don't lose it and have to replace it, or put something like an oil heater in your garage to temporarily heat the space during the cold snap. Well, hello there. Fancy seeing you here. And it's actually because my garage and my barn are both unheated that this year, to avoid frozen batteries and frozen paints and chemicals, and to have a place to put my plants that need to not freeze but stay outside most of the time, I built this little insulated closet thing in my barn. And as you can see, it's not quite done yet. But I have a little oil heater that is both safer than other heating options to heat something like a barn that's unmanaged like this, and also way more energy efficient. And now I've got a little spot that I can bring all that stuff into and store when there is a cold front a-coming. This is also the product of thinking about an emergency situation where I would maybe need to have an animal that needs to be brought inside and warmed up, and previously having no place to do that except our house. So this is a little room that was a long time coming and, still needs a little more work to get there. There are 2 rules of livestock. Livestock can be wet or they can be cold, but they can't be wet and cold. Whoa! Excuse me, don't let me get in your way. And solutions for cold and dryness don't have to be expensive. They can just be cheap or free. Hey cows, come on. Hey buddies. Oh my goodness. You guys must be hungry, huh? Hello. Oh my goodness. Here, butter. Get some extra calories in you, girl. Here you go, butter. They staying warm out here? Whew. Sorry, buddy. No one ever wants to have to bury an animal that they care about, especially if they possibly could have avoided having to do that. And in 15 years of farming stuff, I've only ever lost 2 animals on my watch, but both of them happened during a storm. And since then, the lesson that I've learned is that calories are so important in any kind of extreme cold, because any kind of parasite issue or underlying health issue that the animal might have been dealing with prior that wasn't super obvious before shows up in a really big, nasty way when they also get chilled beyond what they can handle. And it's actually in cold weather that your mineral program is the most important. One change that I've made that has made a huge impact on my animals' health is actually adding volcanic mineral clay to all of their minerals, which not only helps them to absorb the minerals better, which means we have to buy less minerals, but it also actually binds toxins in their body. Interesting side note, that salt is from an ancient sea salt deposit, probably from the Jurassic area. So my cows are possibly licking the same things that dinosaurs were once licking. I also am pretty positive that most of my animals would end up as the first to go if there was a dinosaur present, because very few of them have very good survival instincts. As hard as I've worked to become an of all trades so that my life is as off-grid as possible, it turns out that my life is still really on-grid. And when a major storm happens, the biggest concern we have is what happens when the power goes out. For us, absolutely nothing, because we have a Jackery Home Power 3600 Plus. In the event of a power outage, we are still able to do our jobs, which have a lot to do with computers, Wi-Fi routers, and other things that can all be plugged into this. And of course, we can never forget the most important things, like coffee. And good news of great joy, we can boil water, grind beans, make ourselves some ribs in the Instapot, and also have some Christmas decor going all simultaneously without worry of interruption. It's almost like this is the Jackery of all trades, because not only is it high-powered, well-built, and very, very versatile, it's also quite portable on wheels, and I can pack it up and take it all over the farm with me. Say we have a long power outage and I need to run the oil heater in the barn. Wheel it right down to do that. I just want to highlight that move I did a second ago again. When it is unplugged or the power suddenly goes out, nothing that's plugged into it gets unplugged or loses power, and that's because it's an uninterruptible power supply, which may not mean a lot if you're just making coffee and rice and charging your devices at the same time, but it means a whole lot when we are in the middle of a YouTube Live hanging out with all you fine folks and we suddenly lose power. We don't have to lose our Wi-Fi connection, our computer connection, or even Adam's fancy little light thing that he uses because of this. Farmer Adam finds it especially cool that he can use the app to remotely check the battery levels, change the unit settings, and all kinds of other fun stuff that we're just going to leave to him. We talk about frugality a lot on this channel, and in that vein, these are definitely an investment, but they are a long-term investment. They are made for the batteries to withstand over 6,000 charge cycles, which is 10 years of use. And even within a whole year of not remembering to charge it, it will only lose about 5% of its battery life, which is pretty dang good because major mom brain is going on around here these days. If you're interested in your own home battery backup system, check out the link in the description. A huge thank you to Jackery for sponsoring this channel and for making videos like this for you to watch at home for free possible. Cheers! Alexander, are you ready for some coffee? This, my friends, is what it looks like to run a family business. A lot of people have to learn in a really hard, painful, very expensive way that heat lamps and extra bedding really don't mix. It was Christmas Eve 2 years ago when we got the call about our neighbor's barn being on fire, and it was just because they had too much hay. They got pushed up against one of those metal heat lamps, started a fire, and preciously, their guardian dog went in and carried each one of their goats out individually and saved almost their entire herd of goats, but he actually ended up dying going in after the last 3, which was so heartbreaking for so many reasons. Of course, there's the financial losses of the barn and replacing the animals, but also the emotional losses of losing your barn and losing your animals, and also just thinking about the fact that, it took me 3 years to train my livestock guardians to be the incredible guardians that they now are, and having to start that whole process over again. Every time I look at these guys now, I just really see them in a different light. So to minimize our risk of barn fires, we've made a few huge changes. First of all, we use pelletized pine bedding instead of straw or hay as bedding, and that's simply because this stuff is just less flammable. Also, it's really hard for a goat to push a whole bunch of this up against a light in a way that would actually ignite a fire. We also use ceramic heat lamps, and while these are not going to eliminate your risk of fire, they're going to drastically reduce it, especially if you keep the area around them very clean, you keep them clean. So every time we've got a storm coming, we check the batteries in all of the smoke detectors in the barn. We make sure our lights are cleaned off, and every time these lights are plugged in, because our house is so far away from our barn and we can't actually hear if there are smoke alarms going off, we also use a long-range baby monitor. So if this is plugged in, this is on and up at the house. These things are also really handy when it comes to kidding season as well, but that's a whole nother story for another day. If you have animals, you need to be thinking about water, because in cold weather, your animals are going to be eating a lot more dry hay and other dry materials, which is going to make them very, very thirsty. And we have dairy cows. A lactating cow will drink between 30 and 50 gallons of water a day in peak lactation. If your pipes freeze or your hose bursts or there's some other problem with your water delivery system for your animals, sorry, that's a bull. We don't let him get too close. Yeah, get out of here, buddy. Come on. You're going to be hauling buckets. Our house is a quarter of a mile away from here. A 5-gallon bucket of water weighs 43 pounds. 12 cows at 20 gallons of water a day is 240 gallons. That is a lot of buckets. And you're going to be hauling 1,920 or 40, I'm not very good at math, but a lot of pounds of water up and down a very steep hill from a house that's very far away. So think about your backups. And speaking of backups, we don't have power in this field, so I would love to have a trough heater that we could just easily plug in, but we don't have that down here. So we have to use the next best thing, which is a freeze miser. This is a fantastic option to keep your hoses and your pipes from freezing because it keeps a little water running all the time. But as you can see around me, a little water running all the time will also turn into mud really, really quickly. So have a backup plan for that as well. In this case, it's going to be wood chips on top of wood chips on top of wood chips to soak up this water until we can put that float valve back on. This is now future Anne coming to you to show you that I have put wood chips down to deal with as much of the mud as I could. But this also gives me a chance to show off my very shiny new trough that I just had the displeasure of buying for $304 plus delivery fee because of an unfortunate flamethrower incident when I was trying to defrost the old trough. And that wasn't even the first unfortunate flamethrower mishap we've had. Oops. Ooh, that was too much. Sorry. Too much.
You just like annihilated that thing.
But at least we get to laugh about it now. Or something. Cry about it maybe. Anyway, the trough is great. Dums. In case you don't know this, when it snows or sleets and you have electric wire on top of a groundable surface, it'll ground your whole fence out. And we've talked about how Howdy here is really good at opening gates. So one time when all the electrical stuff around here was grounded out because of a frozen fence line, he licked this gate open and we ended up on the police blotter because the donkeys were out on the highway. And that was less than ideal.
How'd you get him back?
Well, he wasn't cooperating, so we had to actually carry him. That was the real thing that was less than ideal. But I mean, you know, mercifully, though it did cause a 2-mile backup on the road, it was at least funny for most of the people involved. Not funny for me at the time, funny in retrospect though. If you use solar-powered energizers for your fence, or you have solar lights outside, or anything that is solar and battery powered, it's really important to remember that this time of the year, the sun is shining a lot less frequently. And if it's been cloudy for several days before a big storm or a really, really cold frost, your batteries might be really low. And if they are, they're really susceptible to freezing and failing. So in our case, that can mean that the hot fences are no longer hot, our cows are out on the road, or what it's meant for me way too many times to count is I'm replacing batteries or fuses or other things in my solar-powered farm items, and that gets really expensive really quickly. It seems logical to think that wherever there's water and freezing temperatures, that there is then going to be ice, but I didn't really think about how that was going to apply to gates freezing shut until one day I was trying to do chores and I had to climb over the fence with buckets of water and handfuls of hay and other things because I couldn't get this dang gate open. So now when it's chore time and freezing temperatures, I bring this handy dandy heat gun, which has helped me out of a whole lot of pickles, whether it be frozen gates, frozen barn doors, frozen pipes. This thing comes in really handy. And lest you think that I'm actually recommending that kind of latch, this is the kind of latch I use on every other one of my gates. I just haven't been able to replace that one yet. But these things don't freeze very often, and they're way easier to open and shut. They also don't bounce open and let my animals out accidentally nearly as often as that one does. Hi, buddies. What are you doing? Anytime we're thinking about pests like mice coming in, for those of us who have chickens and other livestock, we also want to think about the fact that if our animals are hungry and thirsty and we're protecting them, what's the wildlife going to do? And so in places like chicken coops, These are our mobile chicken coops that have no floor. Tunneling creatures are going to be a much bigger issue during cold snaps because they're more desperate for food and water. They know this is an easy source. So, case in point. For my floorless chicken coops like these, I have scrap pieces of plywood that are just big enough to have a few inches outside the coop and a few inches inside the coop. It's not a perfect fail-safe, but it will at least discourage some of the less persistent tunnelers. Winter is also the time that burrowing creatures are most looking for easy snacks, and that's why my more precious perennial root vegetables like rhubarb get planted in pots that have a protective barrier around that gentle root system. And to further protect them from the cold then, I come and bury them in mulch. And then this basically creates natural insulation for the plants. Rhubarb is kind of a bad example of something that needs insulation because it's actually one of the few things that really benefits from some cold hardiness. However, you can see that there are pots around me. There's all kinds of things getting mulched, fertilized, watered, etc. And not surprisingly, all of them survive the winter without me lifting a finger, besides, of course, burying them and all that stuff. So, yep, protect those plants. If you have a tractor or other machine that runs on diesel fuel, be aware that they don't like to start in the cold. Oftentimes, the oil gets too thick when it's cold outside, and then doesn't matter if you use glow plugs to get it started or not, it just won't start. We got caught one time where a semi-truck was waiting for us to unload stuff, and it took us 2.5 hours to get the tractor started because I didn't know that then. But now I know that if I'm going to have to use my tractor the day after it freezes, I put a germination mat on top of the oil pan to keep the oil warm enough so that this actually starts. Because it doesn't actually get super cold here very often, I didn't learn this lesson until I had a really hard way to learn it, and that was our house is up at the top of a really, really steep hill. And on one particularly icy day, we couldn't get the car down the hill. And so we ended up having to call our neighbors so that I could take little Paul here to the emergency vet. And, you know, it was kind of an awkward phone call to ask my neighbor if I could put my alpaca in their really nice car. But thankfully, Polly's okay, and now we have a trauma bond with that neighbor. But now, every time we're about to have a freeze, I also remember to park my car at the bottom of the hill. Polly, he's such a sweetheart. I've been making videos on the internet long enough to know that not only am I going to get roasted in the comments section for all these super obvious things that I didn't know, but also probably for making light of losing money. But my dad taught me something a really long time ago that has served me very well in life, and that's, if it's already happened, you have two choices. You can laugh about it, or you can cry about it. And laughing is a whole lot more fun. Stay warm out there, friends. If you want to see what it's like to do farm chores during a polar vortex, check out this video. I'll see you there. Cheers!